Lies and disinformation are as old as humanity itself. But today's guest argues that the witch's brew of 30-year-old legislation, mixed with technological innovation and bad actors, threaten the lives of democratic institutions and truth itself. He's Steven Brill this week on Story in the Public Square. Hello and welcome to Story in the Public Square, where storytelling meets public affairs. I'm Jim Ludis from the Pell Center at Salve Regina University.
And I'm G-Wayne Miller, also with Salve's Pell Center.
And our guest this week is Steven Brill. You might know him as a best-selling author or as co-founder and co-CEO of Newsguard. His new book is The Death of Truth: How Social Media and the Internet Gave Snake Oil Salesmen and Demagogues the Weapons They Needed to Destroy Trust and Polarize the World, and What We Can Do About It. Steven, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The book is really tremendous, and for someone who reads a lot about disinformation and the current information ecosystem, this is a must-read. This might be a ridiculous question, though, but I want to ask you about the title of the book. Why should we care about the death of truth?
Well, we should care because of believing in a common set of facts, whether it's facts related to healthcare or facts related to whether a man actually landed on the moon, or whether the Earth is endangered by climate change. Facts are what enable a democracy to function, and facts are what enable a free market to function. It doesn't mean we have to agree the solution to those facts or how to interpret those facts, but we do have to be bound by a core set of beliefs in basic facts and in basic institutions that we're willing to trust, whether it's, a judge that we appear before in court, or whether it's a teacher who's teaching our school children, or whether it's a doctor who's diagnosing what's wrong with us. We should be skeptical. We should seek other opinions, but we can't just distrust everything.
And you write, I think, persuasively about some of the recent technological innovations that have made that trust, at least at minimum, it's under attack, right? So you write about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. What does that provide to the social media companies that affect our ability to really sort of grapple with truth in the modern era?
Well, what Section 230 does, it provides them with total immunity from any responsibility for the consequences of their product, which is unlike any other product in the marketplace. Whether it's the program I'm appearing on, if I defame someone or libel someone, you're responsible and I'm responsible. Or whether it's the car you buy, the doctor you go to. Everybody is in some way responsible. Now we have a First Amendment which limits the scope of that responsibility, but there's still some measure of responsibility. So with Section 230, which was an innocently conceived amendment of 3 paragraphs to a giant multi-hundred-page telecommunications reform bill in 1996, long before there were social media companies. What it does is it provides immunity from any liability for what anyone posts on a social media platform. This was done before there were social media platforms. This was done when there were things called AOL and CompuServe, where people would go into chat rooms. You had to identify yourself, you had to sign up, you had to pay, and there were a couple of instances in the 90s where people said things in these chat rooms that other people thought were defamatory, which they were, and they sued. And the online company, AOL, which did screen its content, was held responsible for not screening it well enough. Whereas CompuServe, I may have reversed this, it could be the other two, but it doesn't matter for this purpose. Whereas CompuServe said we don't screen any content, and therefore they were held not responsible. So members of Congress thought, well, that was kind of a perverse result. The guys who were trying to do something responsibly were held liable, but the people who were completely irresponsible were immune. So they solved that by making everybody immune. So any platform, and again, this was, 5-8 years before we had social media platforms as we now have them. Any platform would be immune from whatever anyone posted on it. Now, if you combine that with the way the platforms built their business, the way Facebook and YouTube and Twitter built their business was by having algorithms that sent you to the most inflammatory content. So if you combine those two things, which is the platforms have immunity from whatever that inflammatory content is, and they have a business purpose to sell advertising to get you to spend the most time, and therefore they will send you to the most inflammatory content, and that's what has polarized our world.
So can you get into algorithms in a bit more detail? What is the harm of them? How does it spread disinformation? How does it contribute to quote the title of your book, The Death of Truth?
Well, there's a story I tell about a woman named Renee DiResta, who ultimately became a major advocate for social media reform and responsibility. In 2013, she had just moved out to the West Coast and had a baby. And she was a tech person, but didn't have that many friends on the West Coast who had babies. So she went online innocently just to find out what's the vaccine regimen I should be thinking about for my newborn. And she was stunned to find that when she looked for information about vaccines, what she got instead was this inflammatory, vituperative content, all these arguments about the safety of vaccines, how the measles vaccine, the MRI vaccines were a conspiracy by the drug companies and doctors, to poison children. And she couldn't believe it. And the more she looked at it, the more they sent her more of the same stuff. And the more they sent her more of that stuff, and she looked at it, in total, disbelief, the more they started to send her other conspiracy theories, because the algorithm, to come back to your question, had identified her as someone who was interested in reading that stuff. So, if you take it to, the present day, if you're interested in reading about, one conspiracy theory or another, or if you have, certain views that are far on the right or far on the left, the algorithm will send you more of that stuff that reinforces your views. Now, I understand that as a baseball fan. And what do I mean by that? Well, as I explain in the book, I'm an avid Yankees fan. If the Yankees win a game and I'm watching the game, I will watch it from the first inning to the ninth inning if they're winning. And after that, I will watch every news account on the 11 o'clock news of how wonderful the Yankees were when they won their game. And the next morning, I'll read everything online about how wonderful they were. If the Yankees are losing, I will stop watching after the second or third inning. I may sneak back in the sixth inning, to see if they've caught up. If they haven't, I will turn it off again. I don't want to hear anything about it. I only want to hear the stuff that pleases me, which is the Yankees have won. Now, that's okay, I guess, as a baseball fan. But as a consumer of news, whether it's about politics or healthcare or the environment or anything else, that act of putting me into a corner where I only want to see the stuff that I agree with and that makes me happy is a very dangerous place for the world to be.
So as a Red Sox fan, I just want to say I'm sorry that you're a Yankees.
I knew I was...
You knew you were opening yourself up there. On a serious note, why has Congress not acted on this? There have been hearings, there have been op-eds, books written, a lot of attention paid to this.
Well,
it's not as if this is like a secret somewhere.
Well, you have what you have instead is every 6 months or so, the heads of all the platforms will be called before members of Congress who are angry and yelling at them. How dare you do this? How can you do this? And people like Mark Zuckerberg will say, well, we're sorry. We take this problem really, really seriously. We know we have to do better, and we promise to do better, and we apologize. And by the way, did we tell you, we're really sorry. We take this really, really seriously. And 6 months later, they'll come back with the same speech, and nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is the reason that nothing else happens in Congress, which is Congress is polarized. It's overcome by lobbyists, in this case, the technology industry, who are able to hang their hats on a very real tradition and a sacred tradition in this country of the First Amendment. But the First Amendment really doesn't have anything to do with, posting with algorithms, deliberately sending people down rabbit holes where they'll think that the COVID vaccine is dangerous and they shouldn't get it. It's one thing to have a debate about that. It's another thing to have an algorithm that will send you all the stuff on one side versus another side. And that's what's happened. And the reason I mentioned COVID vaccines is there's an interesting statistic in the book, which is 225,000 people. That's how many people died in the United States between 2020 and 2022, because the take-up rate for the COVID vaccine was not the normal take-up rate for vaccines. The normal take-up rate in the past, when someone developed a vaccine that attacked a very serious problem, the take-up rate used to be 90%. For the COVID vaccine, it was closer to 70%. And that's because of all the misinformation online that spread, and the politicians who took advantage of that and spread it themselves so that they could pander to one side of a debate, which heretofore never would have been a political debate.
So this is kind of maybe not a silly question. Why do these tech leaders have no shame? Is it money? Bottom line?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just explained it to you. It is money. Yeah. Look at it this way. When they go before Congress and they apologize, what they will say is, they won't mention that their algorithms are actually promoting stuff. What they'll say is, well, there's so many people who post videos on YouTube, or so many people who post things on Facebook. How could we possibly, screen it all to make sure that it doesn't have, pornography or violence or hate speech or state-sponsored disinformation? There's so much stuff. It's, thousands of postings a minute. We can't possibly do that. What other industry can say that? What other industry could say, suppose you have a car company. What car company could say, so many people want to buy our car that we can't take the trouble to slow down the process and install these, pesky seatbelts and airbags because it delays the process. Or we don't want to cut into our profit margins by hiring more people to install, seatbelts and airbags. But that's what the business model of these social media platforms is, which is, so many people want the product that we can't make it safe. Now, if you or I owned a restaurant, the restaurant, whether it's in Rhode Island or New York, wherever it is, would have a sign somewhere that says occupancy by more than 250 people is dangerous and unlawful because it's a fire hazard. The restaurant that you and I own, we wouldn't be allowed to tell the fire inspector or the building inspector, hey, 600 people want to eat here. So we have to ignore that the rule about the 250 people. We're sorry, it's a fire hazard, but we've got a business to run. No one else gets away with that. And Section 230, combined with a perverse view of the First Amendment, allows them to get away with it.
Steven, you are an accomplished author, an accomplished journalist. You've been a media entrepreneur, and you've been really active in the space trying to improve the health of America's information ecosystem. You're co-founder and co-CEO of Newsguard. Tell us what Newsguard does and why did you start it in the first place?
Sure. Newsguard was founded on a really simple proposition. right now, if you or I walked into a library, we'd see books neatly arranged according to subject matter. You could pick up the book and you could look at the book jacket. You see who the author is, you see who the publisher is, you read something about the author's background. Um, and best of all, there's a librarian. And the librarian can tell you this author won the Nobel Prize for economics, but you should know that she's a liberal. So if you want a balanced view, you may want to read this book by this other author who's a conservative, and that'll give you sort of a pretty balanced view. Now imagine instead if you walked into a library and there were just a million pieces of paper flying around in the air, and you plucked one out of the air. You don't know who wrote it. You don't know what their credentials are. You don't know who's financing it. You don't know what their agenda is. You don't know if it's a, if it's a Russian disinformation operation, or if it's a Nobel Prize winner. You don't know any of that. It's just a piece of paper that you start reading. That's the internet. So we founded Newsguard on the premise that we could try to make sense of all that by having human beings, trained, journalists whom we hired, who would read websites and rate their overall reliability based on 9 specific standards of journalistic practice. Were the headlines deceptive? Do they have a corrections policy? Do they separate and label news from opinion? Do they repeatedly publish provably false news? So, for example, what's the difference between cancer.news, which is a website that will tell you that if you buy a subscription to Fruit Pits, it'll cure your cancer, or cancer.org, which is the website of the American Cancer Society. So what Newsguard does is it rates those websites. And it gives them a point score from 0 to 100. And then if you subscribe to, if you buy our web browser extension, when you install it, whenever you see something on a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed or a Google search, anywhere, if there's a URL that denotes a website, our little icon will be there with the point score. If you click on the point score, you will then read a 2,000 or 3,000 word nutrition label that explains completely transparently and completely apolitically how we rated that site and why we rated it the way we did.
That's a tremendous public service, and my hat is off to you. Give us a snapshot of some of the other issues that and stories that Newsguard has gotten into and does get into.
Well, the one thing that surprised us the most when we started the company, we started it at the beginning of all the political turmoil that we're now all swimming in 2018, when it became clear that the Russians had tried to disrupt the 2016 election with all kinds of online efforts. One thing that really surprised us was that it was healthcare more than politics that was the subject of significant misinformation and disinformation. And the reason for that is that that's where the money is. That people who are selling nutrition, supplements or phony healthcare cures have healthcare websites that typically have much more traffic and engagement than websites of major hospital systems or health organizations. And that tracks with what we now know about people's belief in the healthcare system and a belief in their own doctors, which is there's a lot of skepticism. Now, I know a lot about that because, as you may know, I wrote a book about the failure of the American healthcare system, and there's a lot for people to be skeptical and cynical about. Drugs are overpriced. Doctors are overworked because they're now employed by healthcare systems that tell them you should spend 10 minutes maximum with a patient, 15 minutes. So there's a lot there to be skeptical about, but online, that skepticism is taken advantage of and turned into cynicism and disbelief. I mean, again, who would have thought that something like a COVID pandemic would become an issue that divides us in terms of Republicans and Democrats. It just doesn't make any sense.
You know, Stephen, we got about 6.5 minutes left here, and we're skipping over a bunch. The book is brilliant, and people need to read it. But we want to make sure we save some time to talk about what we can do as a society, as citizens, to try to tackle and to preserve the truth. So you've got some recommendations, the first of which is to empower the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. What would that do for us?
Well, you don't have to empower the FTC. The FTC just has to get up and do what it should do and what it does in so many other contexts, which is right now, if you sign up for Facebook or YouTube or any of the other platforms, you have to agree to a terms of service. And in those terms of service, that's a contract. And the contract for Facebook says Facebook will not tolerate hate speech, state-sponsored disinformation, harmful misinformation, bullying, a whole variety of content that say they will not tolerate. And you agree to that, and they agree to that. Well, they are breaking their contract. Again, if you ask them about that, they'll say, well, we try, but there's so much stuff, we just can't pay enough people to screen it all. Well, that's not what the terms of service say. The terms of service doesn't say, well, we're going to try, but it's the Wild West out there. We can't control anything, and you're on your own, which is the reality. And that's the reality that they apologize to Congress for every 6 months. So right now, the Federal Trade Commission could sue the platforms for violating their terms of service. And this isn't any kind of an original thought. The Federal Trade Commission has successfully sued Facebook twice for violation of its privacy policies. And guess where those privacy policies are contained? In another section of the terms of service, because the terms of service are a contract. So that's the first thing that ought to happen. And anyone watching this can help by going to the FTC website and clicking on where it says you can file a complaint, and you can file your own complaint with the FTC. And if they get enough of them, maybe they will move ahead and do something. Doesn't take an act of Congress. It doesn't take amending Section 230, although that should be done. But, we have a Congress that can't even name a post office, so I don't think that's going to happen. But the FTC could do this. Another thing that could be done is, by regulation, the platforms should not allow people to post anonymously. And they do that now all the time. So you can have, Russian bots, are posting, posing as American citizens. You have people posing as doctors who aren't doctors, who are telling you how to cure your cancer. So anonymous posting, which has its benefits. If you're posting in a repressive country and you're a dissident, there is value in posting anonymously, but I think the overwhelming balance now has shifted to where that should not be allowed. So those are two things right there. The other things that have to happen have to do with the political sphere. Right now, there could be citizen ballot initiatives, for example, and this has been done in some states, that don't allow for partisan gerrymandering, where all the Democrats are herded into one district and all the Republicans are herded into another district. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, what the book talks about is the combination of technology, the social media platforms, and programmatic advertising, which we haven't had a chance to talk about. Right. The combination of technology and politics enabling people to take advantage of that technology and to pander. And by that, I mean the two forces of polarization in our politics in the United States are gerrymandering and partisan primaries. And if instead you had a winner-take-all primary with the top two finishers, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, it'd be one primary, Republicans and Democrats, and they would, the top two would run against each other. That would force people running for office to appeal to people in the middle, instead of having The Republican appealed to the most rabid Republican and the Democrat appealed to the most rabid Democrat. So partisan gerrymandering and winner take all top two primaries would really help things.
Yeah, Steven, we've got about a minute left here. You've been engaged in this fight for years now, and I don't think until I read your book that I really had a full appreciation of what the personal cost has been for you, including serious threats to you and your family's security. Why is this fight so important to you personally?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with my journalism background. I've always thought that journalism was the best, saving force for democracy, which is, again, people getting an honest version of facts so that they can make their own decisions and not be deceived. And when you pollute the information, ecosystem with hucksters, with state-sponsored disinformation, and you don't have any way to tell the difference between what's real and unreal, then nobody will trust each other, and we're just in a world of trouble.
Your work is tremendous. We're so grateful that you spent some time with us. He's Steven Brill. The book is The Death of Truth. That is all the time we have this week, but if you want to know more about storing the public square, you can find us on social media or visit pellcenter.org, where you can always catch up on previous episodes. For G. Wayne Miller, I'm Jim Ludis, asking you to join us again next time for more Story in the Public Square.